Baptism and circumcision. Baptism and circumcision. Hello, everyone. My name is Persohn. You can contact me at pastor@mascot.church, which is my email address, or in the comments below if you like. So this topic is a follow-on from some discussions we've been having in our church because we're baptizing some people tomorrow, which is Palm Sunday. So it's going to be kind of a combined service where we talk about the wonderful festival that took place when the Lord entered into Jerusalem at the triumphal entering, and we'll then have that baptism conversation as well. I'm actually doing two services tomorrow, so I've got a lot to think about. I'm not tomorrow, on Sunday, because I've got a lot to think about. You might get this on Saturday, though. Not that that matters very much. Baptism and circumcision. So this is a very interesting and important topic, and we're going to treat this humbly as well today. We'll do the best that we can to keep our claims modest. Now, the first thing that I'm going to open with here is that when what we might call Christian baptism is first seen in the Bible is in Acts chapter 2 at a revival that takes place in the temple, and when the Spirit of God falls. Now, there is a relationship that we need to see with those who were baptized. And the number we have to have in our head is about 3,000. So about 3,000 people came to Christ on that day. And they believed, and they were baptized, and they continued in the faith. That is a one-to-one-to-one relationship. And you can read it in Acts chapter 2. Now, it is my position, and I'm not alone in this, that this relationship between believing, being baptized, and continuing is a one-to-one-to-one relationship that Luke continues with in his thinking and in his writing for the rest of his work and the entire New Testament. So when we get to Cornelius, whose household was baptized, some will make draw the long bow that this included the babies, and this included unbelievers, this included whatever in his household. But Luke has already established something about Christian baptism that I believe is very, very hard to run from. That is this one-to-one-to-one relationship between those who heard, those who were baptized, and those who continued. Also, in this baptism in the book of Acts, we don't really have a notion or any sense that those who believed and were going to be baptized went around the temple. There were 100,000 people in the temple. There were many, and gathered others to be included in the baptismal service that were part of their families. We don't get that going on. Now, it's important not to read into Scripture very much at all. Don't go beyond what was written. I'm going to show you something here in a moment, a quote, that I believe does that in the baptism circumcision kind of argument. Now, how does this play? Well, it plays out in that those who hold to infant baptism, some are very strident in this, and they'll say that infant baptism replaces circumcision. Not too many will say that. Normally what they'll say is that circumcision was a sign of the old covenant and baptism a sign of the new. They'll kind of soften that relationship. They'll really get that from the connection that is made between the two allegedly in Colossians chapter 2. Now, that's not a study for today. We're kind of gearing up because we're going to have a look at that wonderful passage going forward, what was nailed to the cross, the tension in the book of Colossae. I think that'll be a longer video than today's, but that's not for today. Today, however, we're going to look at a statement where something was read into a passage that I don't believe should be, and I hear this very commonly along the lines from those who would defend infant baptism. Again, I believe that that adults who confess are baptized, not infants who are not yet able to believe. Okay, so that's the position. And again, I don't hold any animosity or any criticism to those who hold the other position, but you obviously have to be able to stand along with the view that you hold. Okay, so let's go and have a look, first of all, at the quote that I found, and then we'll look at the passage that it originated from, and we'll make some observations, and we'll talk about two more passages. Time to get up on the screen here. Let's just flick this over, and this is from tenth.org, and it's kind of How I Changed My Mind About Infants' Baptism by Liam Gallagher, a very well-written article, nicely written, a few years ago. This explains, and here's just this semi-quote, this explains why the children of even one believer in a couple are described as holy by the Apostle Paul in Corinthians. They are covenant children separated from the world and exposed to the things of God. And what is it that separates them from the world? It is their baptism. When the latter prophets predicted a new covenant, it was not in contrast with the covenant of grace announced to Adam and Abraham. Okay, so he's saying that that when Paul talks about the children of a believer being holy, they're holy because they're baptized. Now, this is a very curious yet commonly occurring kind of eisegetical overstatement. Paul is writing this and we'll look at the passage in a moment. We just set this up. He's writing this to the Corinthian church that is in a lot of difficulty. And there's many reasons for the difficulty. One is it's experiencing what we would call a massive revival. Corinth was changed by Christianity, and those thumping into the church had all sorts of cultural backgrounds and moral issues and ethical issues and so on. Just read 1 Corinthians to get an idea as to the struggles that this group of people had, and 2 Corinthians as well. But 1 Corinthians just really nails it. Almost everything was being abused, was malfunctioning, was wrong, but God was still on the move, and that was really quite a wonderful thing to say and to see. There were controversies about whether or not someone who is a believer should get circumcised, because in Corinth there were Jews in the population and there were Gentiles, non-Jews, and so the Gentile men would have never been circumcised. So there was pressure from Judaizers, which was a cult going around at the time, and it's not only in Corinth, but it was pressure saying that if you're going to be part of this covenant, you need to get circumcised. And so Paul is going to address this. Now, what we have to understand is that Paul's audience was made up of people who were thumping into the church. In some cases, it was and again, don't think about church like a building where we are today, where everybody's coming and worshiping God in those structures. It was really being part of the Christian community. It's a much less real estate oriented thing than where we are today. Anyways, Paul is writing this, and you have a situation where a man has come to Christ. He's heard the gospel. His wife is not believing, and neither are his children, and he's just right there. And so Paul, and the marriage is under tension, and Paul is giving advice about trying to keep the marriage together. Or you have a woman who has come to Christ, and the same problem. Now, there's no implication that anyone in this group, adults, children, whatever, have ever been baptized. There's just absolutely none. Maybe the believer has been baptized already. Who knows? But there's no suggestion, even remotely, that the children of this particular couple, or these couples that Paul might be kind of referring to, were ever baptized at all. Yet this author wants to read that in to the statement that Paul makes. Okay, let me just flick up on the screen Paul's kind of question and his answer, then come back to you about this issue here. So let's just go over here back to my back to the PowerPoint, and there we go. So this is Paul writing, and we'll just begin here. To the rest, I say, I, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. Okay, so that's Paul's opening here, continuing on, 1 Corinthians 7. This is now 15 and 16, just following on. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So this is the first part of that discussion. Now, please go ahead and read 1 Corinthians 7, the whole chapter on your own. Time and space means we're just going to hop down to verse 18 here. Was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Don't know how that would work. Was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision. For neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. Each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. Okay, so Paul here is making a very interesting set of arguments. First of all, when he says, I, not the Lord, it doesn't mean that he's making this up. It means that he's not quoting the Lord on this topic. And which you know that Jesus didn't talk about about this very issue. So that's where Paul goes, and that's why he's using that phrase. He's not saying, oh, I'm making it up, but God didn't tell me this. No. So think about this. You are in the church at Corinth, and you have heard the message preached by Paul or the apostles or some other believer. You're aware of the miraculous things taking place, and you connect yourself to the community that serves the Lord Jesus Christ. And you do what you can to come around the table of the Lord. You do what you can to hear teaching. The teaching is often done in the synagogues because the churches were, remember, it's not real estate bound. Synagogues were often open to these. It was considered, Christianity early on was considered kind of a sect of Judaism anyways. Paul spent a lot of time preaching there. Oftentimes things were done in homes and so on. So you get this question. Well, what do you believe? What are you saying? What are you saying, husband? Well, I'm saying that I've heard this wonderful testimony of the Lord Jesus Christ, and that he paid a debt he did not owe. However you want to do it. I owed a debt I could not pay. I needed someone to wash my sins away. And the wife said, I don't believe that. Oh no, I'm still serving my pagan god or goddess. Or maybe she was of Jewish extraction. No, we believe the temple system is still valid, and that Yeshua is not the Messiah, whatever. And there's tension in the marriage. And Paul's giving advice. Well, do I just split up because of this? And Paul says, no, if you're happy to live together, stay together. We want peace. Then you have the opposite. He sets it from the men's position, the woman's position, etc. Okay, so that's really interesting. Then he makes this, now you think about this. In this scenario, there is no suggestion that anyone outside of that believing person was ever baptized. Nothing. Yet the writer who we quoted earlier on, like many Reformed writers and others, will say, oh, well, the children are holy because of baptism, is making this really extremely, he's drawing a very long bow here. There's no suggestion that anyone in Paul's audience that he's writing to is baptized, or their children. Maybe they were baptized. Maybe they'd been in the church long enough. But really, look at the timelines. It doesn't make a lot of sense. These are basically new additions to the new creation, to the kingdom of God, Jews and Gentiles. And Paul deals a lot with that, even more significantly in 2 Corinthians, but another topic altogether. So there's not even the remotest sense that they were. Yet Paul makes the point here that because there's a believer in the family, the children are considered holy. That's very interesting. And that God provides influence. Just read the passage. It's very encouraging. If you're the only believer in the family, God has an agreement with you to share or to shine light on your family members, your children, and so on. And you say, well, wouldn't infant baptism do that, like some of our friends we talked about last week? Well, I would suggest no, because of the original sin question. We talked about that last week. But no, but I would say something much stronger than that. You as a believer shine light into your family. You shine light to your spouse. You shine light to your children. You shine light to your extended family. And God uses that. He preserves them for a very specific person. We need to include that and understand that in our prayers. It's a really, really great thing going on here. Now, in Paul's discussion about circumcision, there is an amazing argument from silence here. And my brothers who want to baptize, brothers and sisters who want to baptize babies, who will say, circumcision, infant baptism. They rather, it's really tight connection. I want to ask them a question. Really, why didn't Paul say instead, when he makes this point here, he says, if you're circumcised, don't seek to be uncircumcised. I don't know how that would happen. And if you're uncircumcised, don't seek to be circumcised. Why didn't he say, by the way, get baptized? That's the sign of the new covenant. Right? It just seems like it's conspicuous by its absence. Now, we have to be careful not to make arguments from silence. However, it is not me only making the argument from silence. It's the other position here, the infant baptism position, that makes puts an enormous pressure on the baptism. Infant baptism is the sign of the new covenant kind of argument. And you can hear this. Why didn't Paul say it? Think about what Paul could have cleared up. Now, there's another place, Acts chapter 15, where this is an other very, very significant issue. God has really moved. Let's just see that all my machinery is working here. Yes, it is. If it quits, that's horrible. Got to restart. God has moved mightily amongst the Gentiles. That is uncircumcised. That is believers from all over the known world. Of course, what's happening in Corinth is part of this, but it's happening in Galatia, it's happening in Ephesus, it's happening everywhere, and it's happening amongst Gentiles, even in the Jerusalem area, like Cornelius, who really brought this to the surface, who was Roman, and making a big, big move. And there's a big controversy. And the controversy that you find in Acts 15 is, how do we deal with the pressure that the Jewish system is putting on Gentiles for the Gentiles to be circumcised? Read it, it's right there. How do we deal with this? And you'll notice that the council quotes the coming together or the formation of the tabernacle of David from Amos chapter 9, but never one time says, just tell them to get baptized and it'll be done. Truly, that would be the answer. If baptism replaces the circumcision, or if baptism is the new covenant sign, as circumcision was the old covenant sign, done and dusted. One simple statement. The Council of Jerusalem would have said, we baptize these people. Don't they realize there's no need to enter into the circumcision argument anymore? This would have been a perfect opportunity to do so. The church at Galatia, you read about the church at Galatia, you read the letter to the church at Galatia, the Galatians, and it's a very interesting letter. In Galatians chapter 3 is a magnificent, vaunting, beautiful, I don't know if the word vaunting is right, it's a legal argument. It's magnificently put together. I just read it just for the legal sense of how it's put together, and hats off to the translators too. The problem that you have in the Galatian church is that they were very heavily influenced by Judaizers. That is, Christians or maybe pseudo-Christians who said in order to receive the covenant, to be part of what God had promised, you have to have circumcision and you have to go back to the old, you've got to carry on the feasts and so on and so forth of the old system. Now, these were all tied together. You know, if you say you have to keep the law, the old covenant law and the feasts, then you must require circumcision as well as sacrifices. You can't have one without the other. And so this pressure was being put on the Galatian church, and the Galatian church fell for it. And Paul writes by saying, "Oh, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" Right? It's strong language. And one of the things that the pressures on the Galatian church was for circumcision to happen, and a lot of them were getting circumcised in the process. Now, Paul answers this question magnificently. First, just read the book of Galatians if you want a really good read. Read it a few times, and you hear him do this. But never once does Paul, at the height of the argument, say, and by the way, Galatians, you were baptized, so the issue should be settled. Never once. Never once does he say, well, rather than being circumcised, get baptized, because circumcision was a sign of the old covenant, baptism of the new. Never. It is so conspicuous by its absence, which is, to me, very important. So an argument from silence is a dangerous argument, but it is not an impossible one. It's not one you shouldn't make. So let's just review these points today, and we'll get ourselves geared up for a look at Colossians chapter 2, which I might just do next week. I'm not sure. So points for today is that there was a one-to-one relationship between those who heard, believed, and were baptized in Acts chapter 2, where the whole idea of Christian baptism was introduced. These would be the first, what you call Christian baptisms. Of course, we saw the Ethiopian eunuch, and we saw and then later on we saw the household of Cornelius, but this is the first time. So my humble submission to you here is that this is the divine model that is used in Christian baptism: a hearer, believer, and a baptizee. Okay, and so you'll also notice in Acts chapter 2, they don't go off to find other members of their household to be baptized. No, it's just those, which is interesting. So this, to me, answers the household question very much of Cornelius and his household was baptized. I think it's pretty simple looking at Luke's intent here: believers in the household. Would that be children? I'm saying I don't think you should be arguing that. Now, further on, then we went and had a look at this discussion from Acts. The letter that was written, which says, or the website, which says, well, the family was made holy because of the baptism of their children, or because they were baptized. And I'm a bit taken back by that, because the passage doesn't intimate that at all. Paul's response doesn't intimate it. And in fact, many of the people in Paul's audience would never have had a chance to have their children or families baptized. How could this be? Yet on the other hand, Paul makes the point that because you're a believer, you bring light into your family, your spouse, and your children. And that's a wonderful promise for us to hold on to. We went from there to say, at no time in this particular pristine, perfect place does Paul say, by the way, you're baptized. You shouldn't be worried about this, right? If you're circumcised, uncircumcised, hey, get baptized. That'll be it. He should have, if that is such a connection as our infant baptizing brethren would like it to make. Twice more, two major passages, and others, by the way, that are really important. One is Acts chapter 15, where the whole, what do we do with the pressure to be circumcised on the Gentiles comes up. The perfect answer would be, just get everybody baptized, baptize the babies, whatever. The whole conversation is done then. Never even mentioned. And the entire book of Galatians centers around this very problem. Again, that solution is not mentioned. So that's really very, very interesting. So my name is Al Persohn. I want to say to you that the claims I'm making are modest. I have the highest regard for people who hold the other position. Many are close friends of mine, and I certainly read their material, their theology, and so on and so forth. On this point, though, I humbly beg to differ. And so next week, all going well, maybe not next week, I want to really be sure I've got time to lay this out. We'll look at Colossians chapter 2. By the way, why don't you read it? Colossians chapter 2 and have a look. So what else did I say you should probably read, or you could enjoy reading? The book of Galatians, Acts chapter 15, Colossians chapter 2. That's a fair bit, isn't it? But hey, it's not bad. This has been Baptism and Circumcision, part of the Baptism series.